do this. Ready?
Wait.
I love you guys. Thank you. All right, let's do this.
These videos are not for children. If you're a children, then piss off.
Hey there, it's me, your least favorite YouTuber, Infuso. And while a lot of people know me as a Bat fan, I'm also, in addition, a webhead. Now, I made a video before when this movie first came out, where I stated that I didn't like Spider-Man No Way Home. I loved it. Although it seems that a lot of people didn't get to that part of the video because they had already decided to unsubscribe by title alone. However, now that I have the right amount of footage to accompany my commentary, and I also now benefit from being able to rewind and rewatch the movie several times over, I'd like to elaborate on my love for this movie just a little bit more. I've heard a lot of people write this movie off as being nothing more than fan service. And while there may be some validity to that, I think that it's very warranted fan service. This movie is much more than just a movie. It's an experience. It's an event. It's a celebration of 20 years of Spider-Man in cinema. Having two former Spider-Man actors suit up once again and stand alongside the current guy in the suit is a once-in-a-lifetime moment. And I truly believe that it's not just one of the biggest moments in Spider-Man movie history, and not just one of the biggest moments in superhero movie history, but one of the biggest moments in movie history ever. Don't even get me started with the return of major memorable villains. They managed to borrow a big bad from every installment in each franchise. The Green Goblin from Spider-Man, Doc Ock from Spider-Man 2, Sandman from Spider-Man 3, the Lizard from The Amazing Spider-Man, and Electro from The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Well, kind of. We'll get into that in a minute. They not only just bring these actors and their former characters into the fold, but they pay homage and tribute to the previous movies made. They complete arcs that those other movies began, and create callbacks that make it seem like this was the original narrative that was always intended. These shoutouts and follow-ups make everything feel like it comes full circle. No Way Home pays such close attention to detail in everything that it does at every given moment that it does it. Here's just a couple of moments to serve as examples as to what it is I'm talking about.
She told me that with great power
comes great responsibility.
Wait, what? How do you know that?
Uncle Ben said it.
If you could do good things for other people, you had a moral obligation to do those things. That's what's at stake here. Not choice, responsibility.
Like in Spider-Man there, I mean, they have crime in Boston, right?
Yes.
Yeah, wicked crime.
I mean, they got crime there. In England, they got tons of crime, it seems.
Tons.
Okay. Yeah, I'm good. I've been stabbed before.
Oh, God.
You don't listen to him. You listen to me.
Listen to me now.
Listen to me now.
You okay?
Oh, my back. My back. Oh, my back.
You want me to crack it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
Tells me you're brilliant. He also tells me you're lazy.
Trying to do better.
Well, being brilliant's not enough, young man. You have to work hard.
How are you?
Trying to do better.
I mean, granted, not every one of those moments is as meaningful as the last, but my point is, they complete a narrative, including some that one would think were already completed. The movie even does a halfway decent job at a fake-out. After curing Doc Ock by giving him a brand new brain chip, Electro shocks him and sends him flying. And it was a very similar bolt that fried his previous inhibitor chip, and it was that malfunction that turned him into the villain that we all know him to be. So it makes sense that the next time we see the character, it seems like history's repeated itself, and now he's set back in his evil ways. Of course, this immediately is revealed to be an act, and Doc Ock winds up contributing to saving the day, just as he's done before, fulfilling his purpose while reciting his famous line.
The power of the sun in the palm of my hand. The power of the sun.
In the palm of your hand.
Even the cures themselves are so particular and perfect. As previously mentioned, Doc Ock's chip is an upgrade from the one he used initially to prevent his extra limbs from taking control of his mind. And wow, what a sentence that was. Dr. Connor's cure is identical to the one that was used in The Amazing Spider-Man.
Well, I got Connor's. I've already cured him once, so no big deal. Well, it's no big deal.
Great.
Whereas the Sandman's cure is a recreation of the accident that made him the Sandman he is today. How about having the Goblin kill off Aunt May the same way he tried to kill off Spider-Man originally? Or having Peter try to take his revenge on the Goblin by using his own glider against him, just as another Spider-Man kinda did before. And who is it that stops him? That very same Spider-Man. The Spider-Man who took his revenge and lived to regret it. The Spider-Man who learned by the end of his trilogy the weight and power that comes with forgiveness. Having the Amazing Spider-Man manage to save a life the way he failed to in the past has to be one of the most touching moments I think I've ever seen in a superhero movie. Seeing him redeem himself by saving the woman his alternate self loves from the same fate the woman he loved met was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. Without saying any real words, through his physical acting, we know exactly what it is he's going through. We know what he's thinking, what he's feeling in that moment. With just sad puppy dog eyes and slight nods, he perfectly articulates himself. At first, seeing the relief he feels at having made the save he couldn't before, and then seeing that wash away from the pain he still feels remembering the life that he lost. Gwen Stacy is echoed all throughout his performance. Without making so much as a brief on-screen appearance, she is embedded into Andrew Garfield's performance as Spider-Man. In a way, Andrew kinda lived up to that deleted scene in Amazing Spider-Man 2.
I don't know how to go on without her.
You don't. You take her with you.
When this movie isn't referencing what's come before in the couple of canons, they're making allusions to other continuities.
Go get him, Tiger!
Go get him, Tiger.
Go get him, Tiger. Or should I say, Spider?
Gotta be a black Spider-Man somewhere out there.
And I promise you, I won't turn into a supervillain and try to kill you.
Okay.
Hell, just look to the sky for clever cameos. The answer is above. Easter eggs galore. The brief interaction between Matt Murdock and Happy Hogan also remind me how Matt Murdock and Foggy, who was also played by Jon Favreau, interacted in the original Daredevil movie. I believe that that's the intent between this small back and forth banter, but look, I'm gonna be real with you, I could just be looking too much into it because comic book movies have become so big, of course sometimes actors overlap. It's bound to happen. And when this movie isn't making references to the continuities tied into it, or the others outside of it, it's making jokes on its own canon's expense.
You're amazing. Just to take it in for a minute.
Yeah, I can take it in. No, I can take it in.
You are amazing.
I can take it in.
You are amazing.
Thank you.
You know, I'm something of a scientist myself.
I fell into a vat of electric eels.
I fell into a super collider.
Damn. Gotta be careful where you fall.
In terms of the cast of characters that make up the movie, I find myself really appreciating this universe's Ned Leeds more and more. Yes, he is just blatantly ripped from the Miles Morales comics, but given the name of another Spider-Man Goblin foe, one who Peter was never all that close with. But man, despite all of that, I gotta say it really works. Ned perfectly personifies the immaturity and hopeful naivety that comes with the age that he's at. He's a good guy and an overall fun character. And I also think that the friendship between him and Peter Parker is much more strong and believable in this series than his other Goblin friendships in the two other sets of movies. I actually buy these two as being buddies. There's a real organic chemistry between the two actors. Now in terms of MJ, I gotta tell you, it's kinda always irked me how much they tampered with the Mary Jane character in order to create Michelle Jones. But despite the extreme differences between these two characters, who are supposed to be one and the same, a kinda, sort of, somewhat, I have a really hard time disliking Zendaya in the role. She brings so much to this character. Her sardonic wit, her sarcastic sass, her deadpan delivery. It makes the character different from her predecessor, and it makes it distinctly unique. She has an incredible chemistry with Tom Holland, which is undoubtedly brought on by their real-life romance, but my point is that the fact plays well for fiction. I don't know that she's Mary Jane, but maybe she doesn't have to be. She's entertaining through and through, and she has a presence past just being the hero's love interest. Although I gotta say, this flip-flopping on if she is Mary Jane or if she isn't is a little bit ridiculous. Originally, it was stated that the character was just a brand new love interest for the webhead, and her name wasn't really an indication that she was this world's Mary Jane, it was just a cute little tribute. But it's very evident that they've since backed down from that stance, as this movie reveals that her last name is in fact Watson.
Miss Jones-Watson?
Jones, I don't go by Watson.
Miss Jones.
Mary Jane?
It's Michelle Jones, actually.
Fascinating.
I also have mixed feelings on this telling of the tale making Aunt May Peter's new Uncle Ben. I'm not avidly against it, especially considering that Marissa Tomei felt so genuine in the role. If there was ever a character to replace Uncle Ben with, I think the only fitting option would be Aunt May. The death of Aunt May is completely heartbreaking, and it feels every bit as tragic and as important to the Spider-Man character as the previous deaths of Uncle Ben. However, the only thing that gets confusing is what is Uncle Ben's role in the story? Did he even have one? Did the guy ever exist? I mean, we've previously seen signs of his existence in the past. Peter's briefcase having the letters BP on it for Ben Parker, whose suitcase that seemingly was at some point in life. And there were vague, minor references to the character made by Peter when exclaiming that he doesn't want to worry May because of all she's been through. I also believe that he was mentioned in the What If series by Peter, but don't quote me on that. I'd always figured that we just glossed over that point in the story because casual viewers had seen it twice in a 10-year period. But killing her off after having her recite Uncle Ben's most famous quote does seem to muddle that narrative a bit. Regardless, I don't hate it. Changes needed to be made to the mythos to have this stand apart from the past origins of Spider-Man brought to screen. And I think that this is a solid change. And the fact that we had 2.5 movies with this character, rather than half of a movie, makes this moment feel so much more earned and impactful. I need to give them credit for that, because Aunt May doesn't feel like a plot point like Ben was. Uncle Ben needs to die so Spider-Man can Spider-Man. But who really saw Aunt May's death coming? She serves the same role to his story, and that quote is now tied to yet another retelling of Spider-Man. But really, who saw that coming? On another note, I think the tragic passing of Tony Stark has led to a new light being shed on the Happy Hogan character. Because it seems like ever since that moment, he's kind of become a full-rounded character. He feels so much more human than he previously had. As if this character has only just now been realized as a person. Yeah, sure, they make him pretty sappy and pathetic from time to time, but later on his heartbreak feels all too real, and it's very easy to sympathize with the guy. Benedict Cumberbatch, as always, is great as Doctor Strange. It's interesting to see how quickly and effortlessly the characters transitioned from up-and-coming hero to mentor to up-and-coming heroes. In a way, he does sort of take over the Tony Stark role in Spidey's life, but like May for Ben, I think Doctor Strange is a proper surrogate. In terms of Spider-Man, there is not a bad performance amongst this Spider-Verse. I have a hard time saying who the standout is here, but I can wholeheartedly tell you it's not Tobey. I mean nothing bad by that statement. He's a fantastic addition to this movie, and it's great to see him back. His appearance does certainly tug on those nostalgia strings, but I kind of felt like it was a little bit less of a return of Peter Parker, and more just a return of Tobey Maguire. I don't know if it's because Sam Raimi isn't the mastermind behind this production, or maybe just because Tobey's been out of the suit for almost 20 years, but there was something not necessarily off about his performance, but something that just felt performed. When I saw Andrew Garfield come back, I was like, oh shit, look, it's the Amazing Spider-Man. But when I saw Tobey come back, I was like, oh shit, look, it's Tobey Maguire. I was happy for both, I'm just saying. It feels less Spider-Man and more Tobey. He didn't do a bad job, but I just felt that Garfield and Holland shined a little bit more in this one.
Are you teasing me?
No.
Andrew really took to the role. It felt so natural seeing him on screen again as Spidey. His return to the superhero movie felt seamless. Like he was just leaving one movie and going directly into the next. It feels like barely any time has passed in canon since The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And it also seems like he hasn't lost an ounce of passion for the role since the last time he played it. Tom Holland, who's always been pretty damn good in the role, also stepped up his game here. As this movie, more than what's come before it, really made me feel like the character is the character that I know. But instead of attempting to compare and contrast all three of these different performances on the same character, I'd much rather talk about having these three separate interpretations of the character come together. There's something really heartwarming about watching these three Peter Parkers interact. Something so effortlessly natural about them sharing a screen. I hate to keep using this word, but the trio have incredible chemistry. Chemistry that I would have never thought that they would have. Three versions of the same character quipping back and forth in between web thwipping doesn't exactly sound like a breeding ground for creative discussion, but it is. The brotherhood that's formed between these variants of the same character is honestly astounding. Seeing them bond and at times even comfort each other in their times of need. Looking out for each other on and off the battlefield, and seeing how concerned they are for the other's well-being, or watching them be in complete awe of one another's every word. It's just all so endearing and pleasant to watch. The scene in which they're sharing Spidey stories on top of the Statue of Liberty feels like three best friends staying up at night at a slumber party. You really feel the connection between these three. And it almost feels like they've spent more time around each other than they actually did. How this is their first and more than likely only outing together is far beyond me. You would think that there was a whole Spider-Man trilogy that came before this. What's great about seeing the three Peter Parkers side to side, is that it gives us a feel for each one of them. This isn't a copy and paste performance 3 times over. They all seem like equally valid interpretations of Peter Parker, but each interpretation is entirely its own, significantly different from the one that came before it. I think my opinion on each is solidified with having watched them work together. I've always said that Tobey Maguire is the best Peter Parker. He's goofy, he's earnest, he's well-mannered, he's mostly pleasant. How's this helping? I said mostly. And he feels the most like a geeky, nerdy outcast. Andrew Garfield is the best Spider-Man. He's fun, he's quippy, he's witty, he's sarcastic, and he's caring. I really buy into his performance whenever he puts the mask on. And Tom Holland is the best balance between the two sides of the character. He's a friendless geek without the mask, but put it on him and that kid can sure have fun. Like I said, each one of these portrayals is entirely valid. They all feel like the character. Each of them have their own strengths and weaknesses, and play to different sides of the character, but they all still feel like the character, while not feeling like they are the same exact character.
It gets confusing here.
More importantly, I feel the inclusion of the other two Spider-Men and their almost big brotherly nature toward Tom Holland's Spider-Man help that Peter grow into his own Spider-Man. Along with the influence of Aunt May and her need to do right, even if it's not necessarily the smart thing to do, more than in the previous 2 movies in this trilogy, I think this movie showcases the absolute reckless selflessness of Spider-Man. Giving up everyone that he loves, making it so that he practically never existed, all to serve the greater good, at the expense of himself, is the most Spider-Man thing I think I've ever heard in my life. We all remember the One More Day arc, don't we? I know we don't want to, but we do remember it. Not only does this Peter erase the memories all those who he loves has of him, but even afterward when he attempts to meet MJ and Ned a second time around, at last minute he rethinks that decision. Realizing the imminent danger and threats that come from being Spider-Man's friend or just associated with him in some way, shape, or form, he decides not to put them in harm's way. In the end, he gives his friends exactly what he promised they'd get.
Be a fresh start.
Fresh start.
Fresh start. When Peter sees the villains from the other universes, he doesn't see them with hate. he meets them with sympathy and compassion. He could have easily sat back and watched as they were sent back to their homeworlds moments before their deaths. But instead, he defies his teammate, his colleague, someone he looks up to, all in an effort to do what he thinks is right. Peter fights to give these villains a second chance. He quite literally fights to give these villains a second chance. And then even later on, he fights those same villains still in an effort to give them a second chance, in an effort to save them from their imminent fate. This guy is willing to sacrifice it all for people who want him dead.
You could have just left us to die. Why didn't you?
Because that's not who he is.
Even after May passes, he stands by his word to do the right thing, to cure those he comes up against. Sure, he loses his shit for a minute, but he ultimately decided to not let his aunt die in vain. He decided to allow her legacy to continue on, and to be the hero, the person that she knew he could be. And to me, this is Peter Parker. That's Spider-Man. Triumph through tragedy. That is the blueprint for this character. And this movie excels in that, in ways that I don't think even the previous two franchises did. In terms of villains, Jamie Foxx does confuse me in this movie a bit. Not the whole having Jamie Foxx in your movie, that makes perfect sense to me. But it's what this movie chose to do with him. Every other major villain feels like they're properly portrayed. There's no tweaks made to their characters, they're just as they once were, just now somewhere else. It feels like we're following up where we left off with Green Goblin, Dr. Octopus, Sandman, and the Lizard. But Electro feels entirely fresh. This is a completely different interpretation of the character than we previously seen. Once again, this is something that I'm understanding of. That old Edward Nygma looking dude was never gonna make it in this universe. A change was probably necessary. I just wish a little more explanation was done for it. Max Dillon gets a full makeover, from his appearance down to the nature of the character. Unlike his original depiction of being a delusional disaster, here he's almost the polar opposite. At times, even coming across as the most sensible of the Sinister Five. The one thing that does stay the same, though, are his motivations. His need to be seen because he's lived a life of being invisible.
Back to being a nobody.
You were never a nobody, man.
Yes, I was. Yes, I was. You didn't see me. I'm a nobody.
Hey, you're not a nobody. You're somebody.
And his desire for power, after feeling powerless most of his life, are still very much a part of the character. So in that aspect, he's the same old Max Dillon. But in any other context, he's completely different. I like that when we first see Flint Marko, he's actively trying to save Peter, picking right up from where he left off. His motivations are also still the same. He just wants to get home and see his daughter. So this completely aligns with his arc from Spider-Man. And much like in his first on-screen appearance, he similarly can't stand the other villains that he shares screen time with, and mostly just seems annoyed by their overall existence. Doc Ock is still the angry, bitter guy he was after gaining an additional 2 sets of arms. And then when he's cured, he's the same good-hearted scientist that audiences came to know and love. There's still a lot of heart in this role, and the character's compassion is on full display once he gets over his whole grumpy old man routine. Green Goblin is still the same murderous lunatic, the split personality of a troubled man desperate to try and regain his sanity. And everything I've said about Andrew's return to the role can also be said for Willem DaFoe's. He returns to the scene with the same zany psychosis that would be challenging for anyone else to try and replicate. You can audition millions of people, but you are never gonna get that batshit crazy Willem DaFoe energy. There's only one man who could do that, and that's the man himself. And the Lizard is there, I guess. Look, I'm not gonna lie to you. The guy definitely gets the short end of the stick. But when there's 5 villains, 3 heroes, 1 mentor, a friend, a girlfriend, and an aunt making up the main cast, yeah, it kinda seems inevitable that that was gonna happen. Someone was gonna have to get their screen time cut down. Granted, I will say that he still feels in tune with his first appearance, but he didn't really have a whole lot of time to be anything otherwise, so there you go. And then you have the true villain of this movie, J. Jonah Jameson. The character's once again being played by J.K. Simmons. But unlike the rest of the returning cast, he isn't playing the same role. At least not entirely. This JJ is a different variant of the character that he once played. This one is much more bluntly inspired by and blatantly ripped off of Alex Jones. I'd usually find this commentary heavy-handed, but honestly, I kinda like this change. I think it's both fitting and funny and also kind of current, so I give it credit. JK is once again doing JJ like only he can, but he's doing it just a little bit different than he once did. I loved him in the role in the Spider-Man series, and I love him in the role in the Spider-Man Home series. If there was ever an actor that I thought was specifically made to play a character, it is J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. You're never going to get better than that, so why bother trying? I also really dug that he was wearing the same outdoor outfit that he wore at the end of Spider-Man 3. I almost hate how much I love it. Also worth note is that No Way Home adds a lot of context to a lot of these characters' relationships. None of these villains have ever interacted in previous Spider-Man movies before, because each one comes from a different movie. And because they're antagonists in their own movies, their arcs begin and end with the runtime. So we don't see what dynamics would be between these characters, if any. Actually, there's really nothing to say that they've ever met each other before this. But now it's clarified that most of them did. Norman Osborn and Otto Octavius were friendly colleagues. They were familiar not only with each other's work, but with each other as well. Which makes sense as both were in similar fields and both were on Oscorp's payroll. So it does make some sense that they'd be acquainted. A very similar situation occurs between Dr. Kurt Connors and Max Dillon. And considering they also worked for their universe's Oscorp in the same exact building, yeah, that also checks out. So Green Goblin and Doc Ock know each other, and the Lizard and Electro know each other. And no one knows Flint Marko because he wasn't a scientist, so screw Flint Marko. I really like the visual references to the characters' colors. Norman Osborn's street gear is the classic Goblin look, and later on in the movie it even becomes his villain costume. Electro is specifically and intentionally put in yellow, and when he charges up for brief seconds we can see the electricity take the form of the classic Electro mask. The movie has many highlights, but I think the dialogue really stands out amongst the rest. The standard everyday interactions of these characters who don't see each other every day are the most rewatchable scenes in the movie. Watching the three Spider-Mans become a spider family as they bond over banter about baddies, having the villains become acquainted with each other while sharing details of their odd origin stories, discovering new dynamics between characters and watching them play out. It's all so great. These back and forths alone make this movie worth watching and rewatching. There were, however, a couple of questions that I felt went unanswered. Like, why did Electro go from Dr. Manhattan to, well, Electro? One day his powers are blue, then the next they're yellow? Why is Sandman a literal man made out of sand? He used to have the ability to kinda turn that on or off. What, did he just forget? Actually, come to think of it, why can Electro go from a lightning bolt to a man? He didn't used to have the ability to turn that on and off. Which is ironic, because electricity, light switch, on, off. You know what? I've explained it, it's not worth it. Also, why is it when Electro's a man, he's suddenly good looking? That is definitely not the same guy from Amazing Spider-Man 2. I mean, it is, but it certainly doesn't look like the same guy from The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And Electro is acting completely different these days. Maybe you could just chalk that up to shifting between universes. Things are different here than they are there, and perhaps if people from there come here, then they're different too. Maybe if you bring somebody from an alternate universe to this alternate universe, they too alternate. Sure, whatever, I'll buy it. It's the only thing I can think of to make sense of it all. The only other question I have is, the spell brought versions of these characters who knew Peter Parker was Spider-Man from their own selected universes, except that's not entirely true. The Green Goblin learns of Peter's identity in the first Spider-Man movie due to recognizing an injury he had caused during a battle. Doc Ock had Spider-Man reveal his identity to him at the climax of the second Spider-Man. Ditto for Sandman at the end of Spider-Man 3. The Lizard hilariously figured out Spider-Man's identity because he wrote his name on his camera in The Amazing Spider-Man. But Electro never learned of Peter Parker's identity, a fact made even more obvious at the end of this movie when he says this.
I just thought you was gonna be black.
Oh man, I'm sorry.
Listen, I love Jamie Foxx's inclusion, but in terms of the story, what is he doing here? It would have made much more sense plot-wise to bring in that movie's Green Goblin, who did actually learn Peter's identity at the end of that movie. But then again, you already have one Goblin in the movie, so maybe two is just too many. Not to mention that having Jamie Foxx in your movie is undoubtedly a bigger get than having Dane DeHaan. Sorry, Dane. Still love you, though. On a similar note, Venom's inclusion at the end credits of the movie makes even less sense than the second coming of Electro. Because as far as anybody knows, there is no Spider-Man to speak of in the Sonyverse. I've heard this running theory that because Venom is of a hive mind, and because a Venom knows in Spider-Man 3, that information is passed through the multiverse to every Venom. Personally, I would say that that's a little bit of a reach, but the Venom 2 after-credit scene does seem to add a little after-credibility to that notion.
80 billion light-years of hive knowledge across universes would explode your tiny little brain.
But that still doesn't account for why these villains were being brought from not only different universes, but different points in time on each of their universes. Some have said this happens because they show up there right after they learn that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, but there are literal lines of dialogue that completely contradict that theory. It seems that most of these characters show up right as they're on the verge of death. And also, once again, Electro is there, having no idea who Spider-Man is. One thing I mentioned in my previous review that I have to mention again here is that there is some footage reused from Spider-Man 3 and the first Amazing Spider-Man. Footage of the real-life actors who portrayed Sandman and the Lizard are repurposed here. And yeah, it's definitely something that I noticed when I was watching it in theaters. That's mainly because I'm both quite familiar with the movies, and also I had rewatched all of them multiple times over in preparation for this one. But despite me noticing this, it otherwise felt seamless in execution. The footage doesn't at all feel misused or out of place. It feels perfectly in tune for what those scenes were going for. I actually think that their incorporation into the already structured story is highly impressive. The action scenes, as always, are pretty fantastic, but honestly, they take a backseat to everything else. The fighting, the web swinging, the superpower battles, they're all good, but they really can't compare with these characters trading barbs and exchanging zingers. This movie is nothing short of spectacular. Because not only is it a good outing in its own right, but it also validates all the other Spider-Man movies that came before it. Even some of the worst entries are given love and feel more purposeful in post. It manages to create its own narrative using pieces created by other storytellers. It intertwines the webs these webheads weave. It works as a sequel to several. A Where Are They Now of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films, a second part to The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and the final act to a brand new Spider-Man trilogy. This movie succeeds at being all of those things, while also still being its own original story that propels the character forward toward what comes next, ultimately turning all these other Spider-Man movies to preludes in its wake. I have nothing but love and admiration for this movie and all that went into making it. In a lot of ways, this feels like an evolution of the superhero movie. For me, Spider-Man No Way Home has succeeded at not just being a great Spider-Man movie, but being a great movie, being a great Spider-Man story, being a great experience, being great. As a matter of fact, it's actually almost too great. Because realistically, how are they ever gonna top it? Could they even match it? Even with Wong and Doctor Strange's greatest spells, you can never duplicate the magic behind this movie. It will forever be remembered and cherished by millions. It's a one-of-a-kind film that made the impossible possible. So if you like this video and want to see more Spider-Man content on this channel, drop a comment below saying, "Trust your tingle." And with that being said, I was your least favorite YouTuber, Infuso, and I thank you for watching. Hope to see you in the next one. Oh, and before you go, I wanted to ask, have you ever loved one of my videos but couldn't find it because the copyright overlords have struck it down and smited me? Have you ever wanted to watch some of my many deleted videos again? Have you ever wanted me to review something specific? Like, we're talking a whole ass review at your own request. Have you ever wanted early access to my content weeks or even at times months before it comes out on the channel? Well, if the answer to all above is yes, you're in luck. All of these things are a possibility with the relaunch of my Patreon, so feel free to check it out and sign up for all the rewards I mentioned and all the ones I didn't. Link in the description below.
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time, same bat channel.